Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Millan Singh. I am the founder of PushBrand, and like you mentioned, I am also a founding engineer at a cloud security startup. Today we're going to talk about TypeScript and Nuxt, which is a topic that can be kind of intimidating to a lot of people. I know it once was for me. So let's get into it. So real quick, a story about where I came from and how I was introduced to TypeScript. So I've been working as a developer professionally for 6 or so years, 6.5 years, primarily as a front-end developer. Got introduced to Vue many years ago, but my first real introduction to TypeScript was actually just about a year ago. I started this job at that cloud security company, and their whole repository was TypeScript, both the backend Node APIs and their front-end React app. And let me tell you, it was intimidating. When I first came in and started looking at some of these files, there's all this stuff I'd never seen before. Um, but I promise it doesn't have to be. I happen to come into a mature TypeScript code base, but if you're migrating your app, you can do it a piece at a time, which is what this whole thing is all about. So, as I said, TypeScript is not scary, but it also provides some really awesome benefits that really improve your developer experience. Key things being autocomplete, IDE errors. If you're using something incorrectly, your IDE will tell you. And you can see type signatures for other external functions or functions you're using from dependencies, even if they're not documented with JS doc in VS Code or your editor. TypeScript will tell you what the type signature of that function is, so you know what kinds of parameters you're supposed to give and what kind of output you're supposed to expect. And similarly, when you use those external functions, if you use them incorrectly, TypeScript will tell you. And then most importantly is this concept called type inference, which does most of the work. And I'm not going to get super into how TypeScript works. I recommend learning that separately, but just know that when you start writing TypeScript, TypeScript is going to do a lot of the work for you. And you actually don't have to write as much as you think. So bottom line, TypeScript makes our lives easier and it doesn't have to be complicated. This has definitely been my experience. So let's migrate. So the low-hanging fruit of a Nuxt application, these are the first things you do. I'm assuming you've already implemented Bridge, which was the first step for me. You do a simple TS config, which I'm going to show you in a second. And then I started with migrating my services and helpers, files that were outside of my main components. So they're not my components, they're not my pages or layouts or plugins, none of the Nuxt specific stuff, not even the stores. They're just services and helpers, things that I call outside because they're self-contained. So you can convert those without really having any side effects. And then I moved on to Nuxt plugins and middleware. So real quick, I'm going to show you a little bit of live code, and we're going to go back and forth between our editor um, and the presentation. So the first thing is TS config. This, again, I'm not going to get super into it, but this is very similar to a default Nuxt 3 TS config. The only thing that's different is the default one will not have this compiler options. I added this so that I can import TS files. I recommend you doing that. But it actually is extending this thing that is generated by Nuxt. And you can see this yourself. Again, I'm not going to go through it, but Nuxt generates this for you automatically. Now, let's get to some TypeScript. So again, for those who've used TypeScript, this won't look that intimidating. But for those who haven't, this might be a little intimidating. But understand that right here, I've got some types. This is all TypeScript stuff. But the bulk of this file is actually this class right here. And this is a doubly linked list implementation I used in my front end. There's a couple things. Again, we got a type parameter, so we can do linked lists of different kinds of data. But once we get into it and we get past the initial stuff, you'll actually notice, like if we take this function, for instance, you'll actually notice this is really mostly JavaScript. The only thing here is I'm typing my parameter and I'm typing my outputs, but that's it. Everything else, this is all JavaScript. All this is all JavaScript. And because it is TypeScript, you can see that all of your properties are type. You know what they are. This is a string. This item is a linked list item with a parameter, which I can reference above. So the point here being that when you start implementing it, it's going to look a lot like JavaScript still. You're going to have a little bit of TypeScript, but it's not going to be that much, and it shouldn't be that intimidating for you. And then next, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go side by side here. I'm going to show you, this is one of those helpers that I was talking about. So this is a file that provides some functions, which I use in a few places in my code. And I went ahead and pulled the old JavaScript version of a couple of these functions. So you can see the difference. We have these same functions again here in TypeScript. Again, really the only difference here is that you'll see I'm using this standard type across these functions and casting the outputs. But otherwise, this is JavaScript. And the other difference you might notice is I actually started using a color library. So I changed how I structure the data. But again, it's mostly JavaScript. I'm just showing you this to make it a little less intimidating. And then finally, we have a plugin. This is my most complicated plugin. This is for connecting with Firebase. There's a lot here. I will note there are some quirks in TypeScript with Nuxt Bridge. I do not believe these same problems exist in Nuxt 3 from what I have seen in my experimentation. But in Nuxt Bridge, some of the things like when I provide a helper at the bottom here, I provide this fire helper, which I'm going to use in my components later, but I can't actually get that typed. Even though it does exist, if I look for it on the Nuxt app instance, and especially if I use Nuxt 2 context, it's there. I'm using a different provided helper in this file, but it's not typed. So in my case, I went ahead and created a type that I could cast it to, just so that I could have it here. You don't have to do that, but you may get some TypeScript errors if you don't. And then let's continue here.
Hey,
So
Milan, when you get back to your code, can you zoom in a little bit? It's kind of hard to see.
sure, I could do that. Yeah,
Cool. Thank you.
of course. So the big decision to make when doing a TypeScript migration in Nuxt is going to be your store. So as you know, in Nuxt 2 and Nuxt Bridge, the store folder is automatically generated as Vuex3 modules, which is cool. It's nice, easy to use. But the problem is Vuex3 does not work with TypeScript, and it does not work in Vue 3's setup function syntax, which you also need to move towards to really use TypeScript in Vuex components as well. So you've got to decide if you're going to keep your Vuex syntax to reduce your work. You've got to move all your store into another folder and then create a Vuex initialization manually in your app. Or you can migrate to Pinia and use the Pinia module. I've chosen to go that route because my store isn't so complicated that that wouldn't make sense. And I also felt it was a good opportunity to revisit one of my particularly complicated stores that's become a little spaghetti over time. But that's just my choice, and you should make that for your app based on your needs. And then we get to the bulk of it. And honestly, this is most of the work. And this will take a long time. I'm only 30–40% of the way through this process of getting to Nuxt 3. Because for me, getting to Nuxt 3 and then moving to TypeScript are happening at the same time. And that will probably be the same for a lot of people working on a Nuxt 2 app. So you got to migrate your store. I'm doing it piecemeal. I've done one so far as a pilot. I'll keep doing more. You got to find all your dependencies that are based on Vue 2 and JavaScript and either upgrade to Vue 3 TypeScript versions or replace them with something that does support that. That is annoying. That just, there's no way around it, but you got to do it. And then you got to move to setup function over time. And you don't have to do this all at once. These will be piecemeal. I'm going to show you a couple examples right now of some of my components and how I am in the middle. And let me figure out how I can zoom in here. Window, zoom. That's not what I wanted. I've never had to zoom in VS Code before. If someone has the I would think it'd be under Vue, but I guess not, or window. Command Alt, nope, nope.
I'm on a Mac, so I don't know if it helps, but I think it's
I'm
Command plus on a
I'm
Mac.
also on a Mac. Oh, yes,
Okay.
it is.
Yay.
Okay, much better.
Cool.
Um, cool. So I'm just going to show you a couple component examples. These are components that are in my code, and it shows you how some are more migrated than others, shall we say. Like this example has been fully migrated to script setup with TypeScript. Um, and that's just because I didn't have anything blocking it, essentially, whereas some of the other ones, they do have things blocking it. And you can see that, like, for instance, props, I'm typing these props. There are a couple ways to do that, but, and like I'm using the same color type that you saw before, which is specifically an array of 3 numbers for this value, which means that if I put in another number, TypeScript is going to be like, no, you can't do that because it's not 3 numbers. And it also means that if I'm, looking at stuff here, I have all of these values. So if I, in this particular property is an object with 3 things. If I tried to reference a key that doesn't exist, again, TypeScript is going to say you can't do that because that doesn't exist. And that's the kind of stuff that you'll start experiencing once you start migrating these things over. And it's really nice when you haven't looked at a component in 5 months and you're coming back to it and wondering how the heck does this thing even work? And so moving forward, we have this component, so layout component. You'll see it is in TypeScript, but not fully in setup. Although I think I probably could move this one to setup because I don't think there's any options API stuff left here. Ignore these errors. This is because I have a dependency for Nuxt SVG, which does not work with TypeScript in Vue 3, and it is throwing me a little complaint, although it does still work. But you'll see those quirks as you go, and hopefully you should keep them out as you replace these things. But it's a pretty simple component, and it's the same thing. I can access all the values, and I can see what everything is. I can see that this is an array of these objects, which is really nice. Here we have, I've moved to TypeScript. I'm still using a mix of the setup function. I moved a lot of everything I can. I moved to the setup function, but I still have some methods outside because I'm relying on a Vuex store module, which I have not moved over. And this function is also relying on this same method. So I can't move these yet. So they're just going to be in limbo until that gets moved over. Similarly, this component, you'll see I haven't even officially moved it to TypeScript, and I'll show you why in a second. But this is a fairly large component, but it has a big dependency on called Vuelidate, a package called Vuelidate for form validation. And so if I were to say lang.ts, you'll see TypeScript should give me a ton of errors. You see lots and lots of red. And this is because Vuelidate is not defined on the component. So TypeScript is like, what is this V? This does not exist. Like you can't use this. It's not, I don't know if this exists. This definitely does not exist. So it's going to give me tons of errors, and it would just be a pain to try to make it work. So it's easier to just wait until I migrate Validate. And then finally, we have this color swatch. This is a large component. There's a lot of stuff in the setup function, and I've actually managed to migrate almost everything. But again, here we have some Validate dependencies. And so I've got a couple methods that use that. I can't move them over just yet. And I think this one is not TypeScript as well for the same reason. I also would recommend, small note, but when I'm doing Nuxt 3, I made a specific to-do style note, which I can look up so that when I'm doing my migration steps, I can look for these things and make sure they get sorted. And that is all my components. So the key thing is you don't have to do it all at once. Do it a piece at a time. That's how I'm doing it. I'm still doing new feature development too. If I had to do this all at once, it'd be pretty demoralizing, if I'm going to be honest. And that's it. I'm open to connecting. if you are interested in this kind of stuff, I am actually writing a blog series on on the topic of migrating to Nuxt 3, which includes the TypeScript stuff. And if you want to see that, you should go to my website. You can find all my details there. And then I just wanted to spotlight PushBrand. This is an app I've been working on for quite some time. It's an invite-only beta. I'm really proud of it, and it's really taught me a lot as an engineer. And I want to keep sharing behind-the-scenes stuff from making this, things that I learn and stories from the process of making this. So it's an invite-only beta. If you go to pushbrand.co, you can sign up. And if you say you come from this conference, I'll make sure you get to the top of the list. But yeah, you want to manage your design systems in your projects or your clients' projects. This is built for that.
I was just coming to ask and being like, okay, so how do I sign up? Because I want to make sure that I'm on the list. So now I know
Yeah, that's the
how to go
way.
sign up.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else before I just got excited and wanted to make sure that I was on the list?
No, this is the final slide.
Okay, cool. I realized I'm like, oh, I got a little overly excited there. Okay, well, few questions for you. What were the biggest challenges you faced during the migration process?
Um, really esoteric errors. The biggest challenge is just that the migration process from 2 to 3 is not very well documented. And the basic migration guide is a good place to start. It will get you on Bridge and it will be working on Bridge. But once you start like doing TypeScript, I ran into a lot of problems trying to migrate to Vite, such that I just gave up for now. I'll approach it again later. But that was one of the migration steps. I tried to make it work, and I just was getting all these errors that I did not understand, and it just didn't seem worth it. But that's definitely the biggest challenge in the migration process.
I feel like that so leads into the next question of, did you rely on any specific community resources, documentation, or tools to guide your migration process?
Yeah, so I started with the official Nuxt migration guide, which, like I said, is a good starting place. And then from there, obviously Googling specific errors. I found a lot of things through GitHub issues on Nuxt Bridge in particular has solved a few things for me. There's not a lot of content online, unfortunately. Not a lot of people have written about it. There's not a lot of Stack Overflow stuff about it. I'm hoping to write some stuff about it to at least contribute a little bit to that ecosystem. Um, but you have to be a little creative, and you'll just be prepared to go a little deep on Google. Get to the 10th and 15th result sometimes.
Oh, damn. Okay. Oh, last question. Uh, how did you handle the integration of the Vue composition API with TypeScript?
Well, the Vue Composition API by default loves TypeScript. Like they're very well meshed together. When you do the Nuxt bridge migration and you enable TypeScript through the bridge config, they'll actually have you remove some packages, including the composition API package that you may have been using manually in Nuxt 2 because they include a lot of that stuff by default. And I found that certainly enabling TypeScript and enabling composition API were pretty straightforward. I didn't actually run into any problems in doing that. Of course, your mileage may vary, but um, in general, using TypeScript in components in the composition API is great. It's fantastic, and I've had very few issues.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.